Housing First was born in America almost 30 years ago, and the model is around the same age as me, which makes me feel quite young actually, because we're only just learning about Housing First in the UK now. Housing First, however, in the USA is old news, and it's something that they know works very, very well. It's an evidence-based practice, and it's widely cited now as the most effective way of combating homelessness or responding especially to chronic homelessness. And Housing First is a fantastic yet simple way of responding to homelessness related issues. So what is Housing First? Housing First basically turns the old traditional model of responding to homelessness on its head, and Housing First is saying, let's respond to homelessness with housing as a priority, and let's end the housing crisis, and then let's look at what issues we're left with and resolve those as we move forward. And so I learned about Housing First not because I was out Googling Housing First, but because I just felt common sense that if we gave someone housing, they would be much more likely to recover and get back on their feet. And housing is a basic human need, and it should be a right for everybody, and that I feel very strongly about that. So Housing First was something I came across when I was Googling my own kind of common sense, simplistic ideology about how we could respond to homelessness. And I was staggered to see that Housing First has only just really in the last couple of years hit the UK. However, it's been, as I say, around in America for around 30 years. And they're working so well with Housing First in America that in California, they've recently, since I arrived home from America, they've passed the Senate Bill 1380, I think it is. And that basically is saying that any service or organisation which is directly responding to homelessness now needs to be using Housing First as a core element of its strategy. So California is saying, we understand that it's costly to not respond to homelessness in any other manner that's not Housing First. So we're making it law now. You have to use Housing First. And they really have done a huge amount of research and evaluation. It's taken them years to reach this point. So we really need to be taking a lead from America, and especially California, and implementing Housing First led strategies here in the UK. And we also have to consider, if Housing First is being passed as law in California, where it can cost $2 million to buy a 2-bedroom apartment, then how easy could it be to pass Housing First here, where property value is much more closely aligned with average incomes and salary, and also accounts for those who are in receipt of welfare assistance as well. So I'm a massive fan of Housing First, and you can do some Googling of Housing First as your homework, and you can see just how amazing that this model is. One of the biggest problems we've got with Housing First in the UK is that we don't have, as yet, the supply of property, and that's one of the big reasons I'm working on these social property investment strategies, so that we can try and open up more properties, and we can explore this strategy further, and we can help more people with a Housing First led response to their homelessness circumstance. So what I'm going to do next is talk about different Housing First projects that I went to see in America. And the first one I'm going to tell you about is actually one of my favourite projects that I saw while I was there. And it was a total surprise to me that I saw it. It was, I was sitting in an Uber one day and someone sent me a tweet saying, Amy, have you seen this? And I had a look and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm sure I've heard of this before. This is amazing. And it was the Dome Village. And Dome Village was actually set up in 1993 by homeless activist called Ted Hayes. And he was really frustrated with how Skid Row was getting out of control in the 90s. And he created this utopian vision of homelessness response, which was these fiberglass domes in a car park in downtown LA. And Ted was absolutely incredible, probably totally blew me away how pioneering this project was, considering it was, again, almost as old as me. And Ted engaged with lots of different services, and he obtained funding, and he was able put on lots of amazing support facilities. And the residents of Dome Village were flowing through the complex for 13 years, and the site was only closed down when the Dome Village was, it had its ground rent put up. It went astronomical and they could no longer afford to maintain the site. So everybody, majority of people that were living within the complex were housed successfully and moved on, and the project was deemed a great success. It was really praised by the California government and the LA local authorities, where it was contained within their boundaries. So, as I say, I got a tweet when I was in San Francisco, and I ended up with a day or two to spare. So I managed to get through to Ted himself, who's a pretty well-known guy in America, and he's done a huge amount of activism work. And it was quite a starstruck moment for me when I met him, because he has been he's been involved in activism of homelessness since before I was even born, and he's been achieved an incredible amount in the time that he has been working in this field. So I got to get through to Ted, and he took me down, and we saw LA and we saw the Dome Village site, and he also took me to see Skid Row, which was an extremely moving experience, and one that will probably stay with me for the rest of my life. But Ted was somebody I learned a huge amount from in terms of putting on housing first led response to homelessness, but doing it in a creative fashion and working with people that perhaps don't want to engage with traditional services, like those that we saw in San Jose, who were living in the jungle camps. Could it be if a Dome Village was on offer to them, they may be more inclined to move and cooperate and look at living in a non-traditional sense? So the Dome Village was really, really exciting for me to go and learn more about that. And one of the other exciting projects that to learn about after the Dome Village was it's actually named DISH, which is Delivering Innovation in Supported Housing. And this is based in San Francisco, and I was attracted to this project because DISH provide property management services for tenants who would traditionally be excluded from mainstream housing. So DISH are working with people who may have been on the streets, they may have mental health or substance abuse issues, there may be complex health needs, and they work with the Department of Health, and they take some funding from the government and different places, and they provide permanent housing first led solutions to people who, as I say, would traditionally be excluded. And this was a place I got to see so much happiness and so much love, and I hope one day to be able to revisit. And it really was a shining example of how when you put positively contribute into a community, building a community, then what you can achieve there. And DISH they use lots of clever engagement tools with their residents, and they have lots going on within the building, and they dip into different services and different sectors to provide their support, and it works very, very well for the people that live there, and they report some fantastic outcomes, and nobody ever wants to leave there. So I don't think they can accept any new residents. They have to keep buying buildings, because once people move in, they never want to leave, and that just goes, again, as I say, how the community spirit has been built by putting in some really, really clever engagement tools and making everybody feel valuable and as though they have a purpose within their environment. And there's some really lovely close relationships that have been formed within the location that I visited, and that was a special privilege for me to be able to be involved in that and to witness that. So thank you to DISH. The third and final first project I want to talk about is, for me, the ultimate, my top of my bucket list. I can't ever probably outdo this one for me. I dreamed of going there, and I got there eventually, and it was a bit of a journey to get there. But Breaking Ground New York is arguably one of the most pioneering responders to homelessness in the world, and they're a really famous organisation, and they receive a lot of inquiries of from people like me, it seems, and lots of different organisations and press inquiries. And the work they do is very innovative, and it's very forward thinking. They started out, and how I became aware of their work was via the Times Square New York project. Now, Times Square New York was a project which was set up in the 90s, and it was a huge project. It's like 1,200 apartments in one building, and the building was totally renovated, and new occupants were moved in, homeless people, and again they created a very community-led, family-friendly type feel of environment, and they put on lots of different supporting services and tried to really engage their residents and help them to feel aspirational and move on to new things and new lives and shed the old. And they've done it in a phenomenal way, and they lead the way today still in New York, and they own over 3,500 units of affordable housing in New York, which is incredible. And those units are for homeless people, and they move people into housing as a priority, and they say housing is a basic human need and everybody deserves a home, and that's the principle we work by at Breaking Ground. So I had to have a bit of a pilgrimage to get there. They stopped responding to my emails, and so I turned up one day on their doorstep when I was in New York. I thought, I have nothing to lose, and they thought it was quite amusing that I'd made a pilgrimage all the way from a little town in Manchester in the UK, but they took sympathy on me anyway and told me they admired my tenacity, and I could come back and have a meeting with them. So I went and met with the vice president and a director there, and they were fantastic and gave me lots of information about funding and support and services and using social enterprise, and lots of different tips and tricks that they gave me that I could perhaps take away and put into my own models as I'm working to innovate here in the UK. And so you'll be learning lots of little bits and pieces as we go through the rest of the training, particularly when it comes to funding and guidance in setting up collaborative and supportive management packages. So I'm going to recap now, and then we'll move on to the next part of the training, which is all about collaborative working.